The last study we need to talk about is the Milgram Study. And so let's talk about the Milgram Study. In the Milgram Study, they had people come in and they had to deliver the shocks, and the question was, how many people are going to go all the way to the end? And what they found was about 2/3 of the participants delivered all of the shocks. So my question for you is, how many variables were operationalized in this study? In this study, there was really only one variable being operationalized. The only variable that was really being operationalized, let me make that better, was obedience. And it was being measured by the number of shocks. But you're saying, well, wait a minute, what about all that stuff about them being put in the situation, and then there was an actor there, and aren't those manipulations? Well, no, they're not, because a manipulation requires a comparison group, okay? We have to be able to have a comparison between something else. Those were all different controls that were being done within the study. They were not manipulations. In this particular case, because we only have one variable, this cannot be a correlational design. There's not one variable being measured and another variable being measured. There's only one variable. It's also not an experiment. The Milgram study is not an experiment because it's not manipulating a specific variable, at least not in the original sense. There's other studies that were done later on. But this Milgram study, the way we know it, the classic study, was not actually an experiment, nor was it correlational design. In fact, this was a frequency study. The outcome was 2/3 of the people gave the shock. That is a frequency study. It's not comparing any other variable. It's not looking for an association, right? An association would be a correlational study, where we're looking at something like self-control when you're 4 being associated with your drug use when you're an adult. That is an association study. And it's not an experiment because we're not manipulating a variable. We're not manipulating justification and seeing if it changes liking. That would be a causal conclusion from an experiment. The Milgram study gives us only a frequency claim, and therefore by itself is not very interesting. What's interesting is an assumed comparison that we have, what we would actually expect just off of our common knowledge, right? That would be what is assumed to be the comparison group, but there's not actually one in the study. So what we've talked about then are several different things that we need to discuss. We talked about the different kinds of claims. In this one, let's talk about what we can do with the validities. So first, is there a question of construct validity in this particular study? The answer is yes, there is, because we need to know whether or not the number of shocks is really measuring obedience. So a question of construct validity is the number of shocks actually a good measurement of obedience? Is it really operationalizing what it claims to operationalize? Next, when we talk about statistical validity, in this case, the only statistic is really the percentages. Theoretically, they could still have problems with statistical validity. It's pretty hard to do, but all they're looking at is a frequency statistic, so it's hard to be mistaken in that. But theoretically, that would be the statistical validity question. Is there an internal validity question in this study? No, there's not. There cannot be an internal validity question because it's not an experiment, right? It's not looking at the connection between one circle and another circle, one conceptual variable and another conceptual variable. It's not asking, does the independent variable cause a change in the dependent variable? That's what an internal validity question is. This one doesn't do it. What about an external validity question? The external validity question is, would this apply outside of the particular study? Would this apply in the real world outside of a study where there's a researcher there and they're being asked to do the things? Does the conclusion apply outside of the study? And that would be a question of external validity for this. Okay, thanks everybody.